Hello friends. This is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto united Haku, Mikoto and Kushina and rebuilt a new legacy? Episode 4. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, after uncovering a hidden Uzumaki secret, Naruto begins a journey that brings together Haku, Mikoto, and Kushina in an unexpected alliance that could change the fate of the Shinobi world forever. Now, let's start. Mikoto and Tsunade both emerged from their respective bedrooms just a few minutes after 7 o'clock the next morning. The sun was shining through the balcony window, casting the room in pastel orange light that was quickly turning into bright yellow as it rose higher into the sky. Both of them looked around and noticed that Naruto was not on the couch. Mikoto knew him to be an early riser and figured that he was likely either out training, she hoped not. This was supposed to be a vacation, after all, or maybe just taking an early morning walk. Tsunade also was not concerned as to the whereabouts of their male companion, as she guessed that he would be back soon enough. Noticing that Kushina wasn't in the living room and that her bedroom door was closed, they both found themselves somewhat surprised that their red-headed friend was still asleep. Kushina was usually an earlier riser than the two of them, and she would usually have hot tea ready for them all by now, likely with breakfast on the way if it was her turn to cook. Mikoto decided to quietly knock on Kushina's door and open it just enough to take a quick glance inside, only to be stunned by what she saw. She snapped around to Tsunade and gestured to her to approach very quickly and abruptly. Tsunade, now genuinely curious, did as requested and peered inside the room. Her eyes went wide at what she saw. There, in Kushina's bed, were Kushina and Naruto, with Naruto sleeping on his back and an arm around Kushina, while Kushina was leaned into his side with one leg draped over both of his. From what the two stunned women could see, neither Naruto nor Kushina was wearing anything from at least the waist up. But on top of that, Naruto had blonde hair instead of his usual black. Only his whisker marks and the distinctive shape of his face told Mikoto and Tsunade that it was indeed Naruto who was in that bed. "Good morning," Tsunade sang out somewhat loudly, causing both Naruto and Kushina to groan as they woke up. Naruto flinched as the light from the sun hurt his eyes. He sat up and grumbled, "Is it morning, already?" "I guess so, Naru-kun." Kushina groaned in response as she sat up as well, her large, shapely jiggling slightly as she did. She looked down and seemed to notice that she didn't have a bra or any other piece of clothing covering her top. Guess I must have taken it off in my sleep or something," she commented sleepily. Naruto glanced at her and followed her gaze to her chest, before smiling and commenting just as groggily, "You should sleep like that more often, Kushi-chan. You look great." Kushina smiled at Naruto and gently kissed his lips. "Thank you, honey. I think I will from now on, especially for you." Naruto's smile widened as he directed it right at her. He slowly brought a hand up to one of her and leaned in to kiss her before he was interrupted by the sound of a cough. He turned to see Mikoto and Tsunade at the door. It was Mikoto who spoke up. "Well, as interesting as this little show is, we would like to get our day started. So, Kushina, could you please get up and make us some of that wonderful tea you always make?" Kushina nodded. "Sure, no problem," before turning back to Naruto and kissing him once more, showing no embarrassment or shame whatsoever. "I'll see you out there in a little while, okay?" "Okay," Naruto offered with a smile. Kushina then got up, threw a robe on, and left the room to proceed with brewing their tea and leaving Naruto to shower and freshen up for the day. Naruto, Kushina, Mikoto, and Haku were currently in the living room area of their suite, just making small talk while waking up. As promised by Naruto, Haku was brought over to their suite so she could get to know the three women that Naruto was spending time with. Mikoto was having fun teasing Naruto and Kushina about being caught in bed together, despite their objections that all they did was sleep, in the literal sense of the word. Both Mikoto and Tsunade couldn't get over just how great Naruto looked with golden blonde hair and those brilliant glowing bluish-green eyes. It was only by the whisker marks on his face that they could tell it was Naruto, as his tail was underneath the bed covers. They had been at this for about half an hour before Tsunade came striding out of her room with purpose. "You," Tsunade pointed at Naruto, "come with me, right now." "Say what?" Naruto responded somewhat dumbly. Tsunade sashayed over to him with a mischievous smile as she repeated each word slowly while pointing her finger at Naruto with each utterance. "Come with me, right now." Well, okay, he responded somewhat warily. "Good, then." Tsunade smiled sweetly at him with her eyes closed. "It's settled. You're taking me out to breakfast, and I'm going to share a proposal with you. I'm not gonna regret this, am I? Most surprises I've ever gotten in my lifetime really haven't been pleasant ones." Kushina flinched slightly at that, which didn't go unnoticed by the others, including Naruto. Just as he was about to apologize to Kushina, Tsunade answered him in a tone that was more reassuring. "Naruto-kun, I assure you that I don't have any unpleasant surprises in store for you. In fact, I believe you'll really like what I have in mind. Just trust me, okay?" Naruto considered her answer for a moment before nodding and allowing Tsunade to lead him out. Tsunade turned to Kushina, Mikoto and Haku and told them, "And don't worry, girls, what I have in mind, I believe will make everybody involved happy, and that includes the three of you." Tsunade closed the door behind her and Naruto once she had led him out of the suite. After leading him out of the inn, they made their way to a small, quiet diner to get away from the bustle of the inn's common room. They did love the familial feel of the inn's common room, but it would be far too loud for the kind of conversation that Tsunade had in mind. Once their orders had been taken and they had eaten a satisfying meal, Tsunade paid the bill and got to the point of her taking him out of the room. "Naru-kun, I've been thinking about your little dilemma over not having any hobbies or likes apart from fighting or training, and I believe I have come up with a solution." "Okay, what's your solution?" Naruto asked cheerfully, now genuinely curious. "Well, I've noticed that you've got at least 3 women who want to be with you, and a possible 4th on the way. That possible 4th would be my niece Shizune, by the way. She's become rather smitten with you just over the content of your writings to us alone." She paused before adding teasingly, "And while you seem to be a fantastic kisser," her smile dropped and became more genuine once again, "I would guess that your dating skills might be close to non-existent, for lack of opportunity to learn any or put them to use. Am I right?" Naruto blushed in mild embarrassment before nodding slowly in agreement with her. She smiled warmly and understandingly. "Please don't be embarrassed, Naruto-kun. It's not your fault, and herein lies my proposal. I would like to personally give you some special one-on-one coaching on how to date and court a lady properly. This coaching will all be hands-on, with you taking me on a series of different dates. This will give us a variety of activities to try, and we can see what it is you like doing. And while doing this, you'll learn how to treat a lady with such poise and class that you'll likely have any woman you want eating out of your hand." Tsunade leaned forward with a playful smile and asked, "So, what do you say? Wanna date me?" "I'm not opposed to the idea," Naruto answered, considering her offer. "But, why would a woman such as you want to date a man such as myself? And just what's wrong with you that I wouldn't?" "Nothing, really. It's just that, you've certainly got a lot more going for you than I do." Tsunade couldn't help the blush and the smile that crossed her face at such a genuine compliment. "So I guess it's just hard for me to see what a lady of your caliber and pedigree would want with a guy who spends most of his time either training by himself or on the road, hunting and foraging for most of his meals. Naruto-kun, Tsunade explained to him in a more sober tone, you have so much more to offer than you know. If you didn't, you certainly wouldn't have the affections of a woman such as Mikoto Uchiha. Haku also seems like a lovely young lady who certainly wouldn't grace just anyone with the degree of attention that she gives to you. And then there's Kushina. There would be a certain social stigma to her establishing a romantic relationship with you, but she sees a man of such worth in you that she'll risk it without a second thought just for the chance to have you. You're insanely brilliant, and you're incredibly powerful on top of that. Tsunade moved from her seat across from him into the seat next to him at their table, and you don't lack as much culture as you're letting on. You just don't know what your personal likes and dislikes are yet, because you've never really had a chance to be exposed to civilized life. This is our chance to expose you to more of it. Tsunade placed her hand over Naruto's as she continued giving him her motives behind her solution. It also gives me a chance to truly get to know you in a very unique and intimate way, which is why I am actually here, in the first place. Then, there's also the satisfaction of knowing that I'm showing you how to give Mikoto, Kushina and Haku the time of their lives on every romantic evening you plan for them. After this, Tsunade stood up, not letting go of Naruto's hand and gently pulling to prompt him to follow her out. After they had exited the diner, Tsunade took Naruto's arm in both her own and gave him her final reason, and just for me. I haven't been on a date worth remembering in decades, and I've certainly never been on the arm of a man who is as ruggedly gorgeous as you are, she finished while rubbing his arm between her magnificent, bringing a dark flush to his cheeks. So, I'll ask you again, wanna date me? Tsunade asked, this time through half-lidded eyes, knowing that Naruto would be more likely to say yes to a sultry woman. Naruto simply smiled. You know what? It sounds like fun. Why not? Let's do it. Wonderful, Tsunade exclaimed, leaning towards him to kiss him on the cheek. Our first date will be tonight. I'll make the arrangements, and then I'll teach you how to make said arrangements. We'll start off tonight with something somewhat simple. Dinner at a nice restaurant and a nice romantic walk along the beach at sunset and into the night. How does that sound? It's all new to me, so I'll look forward to it, he answered honestly. The two of them simply continued back to the inn, smiling and laughing with each other while just talking about whatever came to mind. They both realized that even though this was a purely educational situation for Naruto, they actually almost felt like a real couple. It had been almost 2 years since Naomi was named heir of the clan in place of the trash. Life had not gone as she had expected it to in the time since. When before she would always get smiles and friendly greetings, now she would hear people whispering about her, and a good number of those people would outright glare at her and her father. The glares were always worse when she was by herself. Aside from that, there were many businesses in Konoha who simply refused her and her father's service, citing that they either hated what the two of them had done to to him, she would not use his name, not even in her own mind, or they would simply lose too much business due to having clients who didn't appreciate what the Hokage did to his own family while preaching about the village being a family at the same time. One such place was her favorite restaurant, Ichiraku Ramen. She had been limited to packaged ramen since Tsuki and Ayame had banned them from their establishment, and they were absolutely disgusting. They had none of that heavenly flavor or any other condiments that she was used to eating in her ramen when it was prepared properly. She couldn't depend on her mother's ramen since Kushina had disowned her and divorced her father. Her mother hadn't had anything to do with her ever since due to her hatred of her brother. Regardless of that, her mother wasn't even in the village right now. She couldn't depend on her father either since he was always in his office doing that blasted paperwork. More and more businesses started closing their doors to the two of them as well. Not just restaurants, but clothing stores, supermarkets, and even some Shinobi supply stores. Every time she walked through the commercial district of the village, she noticed more and more large white signs hanging in clear view on most of the businesses there. The number of them had grown in the past couple of years. All the signs were carrying the same basic message, though worded somewhat more colorfully in some than others. No service to Namikaze. She couldn't believe so many people had reacted the same way, even though she knew that some of the people hated Naruto. The rest of the people actually liked the bastard, and that was something she just couldn't wrap her head around. In her opinion, he didn't do anything to gain their support. He was just unwanted trash. Arg. This is all that bastard's fault. If he hadn't been born, then none of this would have happened. Mom wouldn't look at me like I did something bad. The Ichirakus wouldn't have banned us, and Mom would still be living with Dad. She raged in her head while gritting her teeth in an angry grimace with balled-up fists, still firmly believing that everything that had happened was by no fault of hers or her father. At the moment, she was hungry and had left the house to get something to eat since she couldn't get ramen, but she was damn sure not going to eat that processed shit called ramen in the Namikaze house pantry any longer. Her choices of restaurants that she could eat in were limited to 4. None of the others would serve her and her father. The people that ran those businesses truly hated Naruto and were very vocal in their thoughts of him, even praising Naomi for helping in getting rid of the demon scum. She made her choice, and entered a restaurant where, as soon as she walked in, most of the staff there were bowing at her feet. In this place, she was always given the best table and a 50% discount on her tab. She ordered her meal and began eating, all the while waiters and even the manager were walking by her calling her Naomi-sama, and telling her how she should keep up her strength so she could finish off the demon if he ever returned. Some of them even had the idiocy to tell her that once the demon was dead, her mother would be free of its control and she would have a happy family once again. It wasn't lost on her that most of the staff were pretty badly scarred. She had heard about what her mother did to people who badmouthed the trash, and from what she could see, she was grateful that she had never witnessed the acts that gave them such horrible disfigurements. She couldn't actively enjoy being praised nowadays, since the praise that she once received from the entire village had now dwindled down to around 100 people. She knew their praise was empty. She even knew that they were wrong. The bastard was no demon. He was just worthless trash. There probably wasn't an evil bone in his body, and she still felt the occasional pang of guilt when she reflected back on her hatred of him, which she would always squelch just as soon as she became aware of it. What hurt the most, though, was that she knew that her mother would never take her back, not so long as she hated him. After she had finished eating, she decided on what to do next. She figured her perverted godfather was back at the compound waiting on her. He had finally gotten out of his body casts 2 months ago and was able to use the restroom without screaming and pissing blood. She sighed as she proceeded to head back to the clan compound in order to train with her godfather. Naruto quickly realized that Tsunade wasn't kidding when she said she would teach him all of the ins and outs of dating and courting a lady properly. The lessons were also very hands-on. Shortly after they had returned from breakfast, she dragged the man around town all day and actually showed him how to do all of the things that she was teaching him. He had no idea that so much could be involved in just properly preparing a date, choosing the type of restaurant to dine in depending on the person and the level of formality of the date, making advance reservations at a restaurant, choosing the seating inside the restaurant to optimize the view and the natural surroundings. Tsunade's lessons were quite involved. Despite this, however, Naruto was quite happy for the lessons, easily being able to see just how what she was teaching him would impress a woman. Given that many of the restaurants were already booked solid, Naruto had also learned that the earlier reservations were made, the better. The restaurants were willing to break reservations to make room for their national hero, but Naruto would have none of that. He would not put out customers who could well have been waiting for weeks to eat at their establishments. With promises of future business, he declined their offers for preferential treatment to other customers, an act which thoroughly impressed Tsunade. His appeal to her, as well as her level of respect and esteem for him, all rose several notches at his humility. After this came her lessons on proper dating attire. Again, depending on several factors, the level of formality of the date, the activities that they would be engaging in, etc. She had taken him to several clothing outlets for this, and she also bought all of his clothes for him. 3 different suits, with several button-down shirts and ties that could go with each one, several nice but casual outfits, and even some nicer, scaled-up athletic wear for dates that would involve being a little more active. By the time they were done, Naruto had more clothes than he had ever owned in his life. Tsunade wouldn't even let him see the outfits that she bought for herself. They got back at the inn at 4 o'clock, and Tsunade told him to get ready for their date considering their reservation was in 3 hours. She then immediately ran into their suite, gathered the other girls, and corralled them into her bedroom. Naruto could hear the squeals coming from said room in less than 5 seconds. He spent the extra time putting his clothes up in his and Kushina's shared closet, and cleaning himself up. By 6:15, Naruto was completely dressed and ready for his date. He wore a classic black and white suit with matching black wingtip shoes. He went into the living room and sat on the love seat, waiting for Suon to appear. He didn't have to wait long, as 10 minutes later, her bedroom door opened to a sight that nearly made him choke. "Oh my Kami," he thought to himself before completely losing himself in the sight before him. There was Tsunade, wearing a form-fitting jungle green dress that resembled a single piece of linen which wrapped around her in several layers and ended very high on her thighs. The dress showed all of her curves, and accented her body in all the right places. Her shoulders and arms were bare, though her sensual legs were dressed in green stockings that likely ended just inside her dress. Her feet were adorned with matching jungle green high-heeled sandals. Her fingernails and toenails were painted the same shade of green. When Naruto's gaze finally returned to her face, he saw that she was lightly made up, with just enough blush to add a very light tan to her face, though her eyes were dressed in green eyeshadow, and her lips were adorned in a sultry jungle green semi-gloss. Her hair was not styled in its usual twin ponytails, but instead flowed freely behind her back, following the movements of her head as she would turn it. While Naruto was mindlessly staring at Tsunade, she couldn't help but check him out as well. "Wow, he fills that suit out very nicely," was her only thought before she noticed his expression. His eyes were glazed over, his mouth was slightly agape, and he was about to start drooling. Tsunade smirked knowingly as she giggled to herself, thinking, "It looks like nobody's home. Guess I did pretty good with this look." She sashayed her way over to her gaping date and with a sultry smile, gently closed his mouth for him and spoke up with a giggle. "Naruto, is something really going to have to fly in there before you learn to keep your mouth shut?" Hun," was his response before he blinked and shook his head, collecting himself. "Sorry Tsunade-chan, but you look, well, like a goddess of the earth or something, so how can I not stare?" Tsunade blushed at his description of her while giving him a genuine grateful smile. Why, thank you." Naruto laughed sheepishly before blurting out quickly, "Anyway, why don't we go before we're late for our reservation at the restaurant?" Tsunade nodded, the smile never leaving her face. She took Naruto's arm in both of her own and allowed him to lead her out the door. Once they heard the front door close, Haku, Kushina and Mikoto all came out of Tsunade's room to sit in the living room and wait for Tsunami to finish preparing dinner. Tsunami had told them that she would be cooking her special seafood and crab stew, so they had decided that they would be eating dinner in the common room downstairs tonight. As they thought about what they had seen and heard when Naruto and Tsunade first saw each other, blood-red blushes crossed all three of their faces. One collective thought went through their awe-filled, slightly perverted, and slightly jealous minds. Lucky bitch. There were a few moments of awkward silence in the room before Mikoto broke it, saying, "You know what, girls? We'll all get our chance, too. Tsunade's doing this for our benefit, too. Let's remember that." Haku responded with a smile. "You're right, Mikoto. They're both doing this for us." Kushina smiled with a silent nod as their jealousy faded. They would know what Tsunade was teaching Naruto soon enough, and they were all satisfied with that. A playful gleam suddenly entered Kushina's eye as she remarked, "You have to admit, though, Naruto-kun looks too cute when he's flustered like that, doesn't he?" Haku and Mikoto laughed in agreement, both having to admit that Kushina's remark was all too true. As they walked towards the restaurant, Tsunade entered, dating coach mode once more. Their lessons on date preparation had been covered well enough for one day, and now Tsunade was coaching him on how to properly treat a lady while on the date itself. Naruto learned many little things that would be considered gentlemanly. Things such as bringing a date flowers or a small gift, offering her his arm to walk on, or even his hand to hold if she wished, and opening doors for her or pulling her chair out from under the table for her so that she could be seated. Naruto and Tsunade eventually found themselves at the entrance of the restaurant where they had placed their reservation. Once they verified who they were to the maitre d', they were quickly led to their table where Naruto pulled Tsunade's chair out for her, earning him a warm smile as she took her seat. The maitre d' himself took their order and immediately whisked away to the kitchen to have it prepared. He appeared a few moments later with a pitcher of water, fruit juice and sake, and cups and saucers for each. He quickly poured each of them a glass or saucer of all three and made his way back to the kitchen to ensure that they got their meal as quickly as possible. Tsunade raised her sake glass in Naruto's direction and proposed a toast to a wonderful, fun-filled evening filled with many intriguing possibilities. Naruto blushed slightly at Tsunade's proposed toast, but raised his glass with her nonetheless, both of them emptying their sake saucers at the same time. Once they had finished, they fell into comfortable conversation while waiting for their dinner to arrive. Tsunade told Naruto that under normal circumstances, it was considered polite and thoughtful for the gentleman to allow the lady most of the time to talk, while he would ask questions about her. Tonight, though, she also wanted to get to know him more, so she instead chose to ask more about him. He told her that he had developed a liking to teaching, which led to him telling her his plans for Wave. She thought that Naruto wouldn't be able to surprise her anymore, but after hearing his plans to make Wave better by creating a new hidden village within Wave, she was completely astounded. Naruto told her that he planned on telling her and others at some point in the near future, depending on how this vacation turned out. Then he beseeched her not to tell anyone. After hearing his reasons for secrecy, she agreed. Naruto got back to telling her more of his likes. He told her about his newly discovered hobby of stargazing, along with how it came about. He talked about how to tell the differences between stars and planets, as well as how several of the stars would twinkle different colors, from red to blue to yellow to green to orange, all within less than a second. He had in fact told her about it with such enthusiasm that while she would have considered such an activity to be the pinnacle of boredom before, she was now intrigued to see what it was about such a pastime that captured Naruto's attention. The food came within half an hour and they ceased their talking for the moment. After eating, they paid their bill and left, then decided to go for a walk. It was a little past sunset when they found a beach, the last vestiges of twilight still visible in the western sky while the eastern horizon was hidden in the black of the night. Both of them stopped just short of where the walkway ended to take in the beauty of waves' nighttime beaches accompanied by the gentle hissing of the waves crashing to the shore. Naruto then noticed that some of the stars were becoming visible. Tsunade-chan, look. Some of the stars are coming out. Don't they look amazing? Naruto said with wonder in his voice as he watched more stars appear, pointing more and more of them out. As he pointed them out, she began to see what he was talking about at dinner. These were things that Tsunade had never noticed before. It was as if the night sky, which had been the same mundane, unnoticeable sky to her every single night of her life, had suddenly become a different place. Naruto had just shown her a whole new world. Yes, it is, Tsunade replied breathlessly, with an equal amount of wonder in her voice. She continued to follow his finger as he pointed out more and more stars. She couldn't remember when they had found a smooth rock to sit on, or when she had found herself sitting back against him and leaning into his chest with his arms around her waist, or at least one arm was around her waist when he was pointing at stars, but before she knew it, 2 full hours had passed. Tsunade turned her gaze back towards his face, catching his own gaze towards her at the same time. As they looked into each other's eyes, both of their pulses began to quicken. Both of them seemed to become aware of where their hands were, but before Naruto could move his hands, Tsunade slid her hands over his own, holding his arms in place. She swallowed unconsciously, followed by Naruto as he swallowed as well. Flushes began to creep across both of their faces as they found themselves moving their faces slowly closer to each other. Seconds passed. Their faces drew closer until they could feel their breath on each other's faces. Tsunade, realizing what was happening, turned her head away and commented quietly with just a hint of sadness, "We should probably get back. It's getting late." With a sad sigh, Naruto nodded, "Yeah, you're right." Naruto then got to his feet and scooped Tsunade into a bridal carry to carry her back across the sand to more solid ground. Once they reached the walkway, he gently placed her back on her feet. They began to walk back to the inn slowly, an awkward silence permeating the air, both of them lost in their own thoughts. "I have to remember that this is just educational for me," Naruto thought to himself sadly. Tsunade's doing this for the other 3 and her niece, not for her. Tsunade's thoughts were taking her in a different direction. What is wrong with me? I know that I'm doing this mainly to show him how to date and treat a lady, but I had a chance to see if. No, I can't think that way. The idea is ridiculous. He's 18 and I'm 50. She took a quick glance at him through the corner of her eye. Still, though, I think he wanted it as much as I did. I didn't think I'd find myself this confused. Her thoughts began to change direction, but on the other hand, I am teaching him how to date, and even though I'm more of a teacher, I am for all intents and purposes his girlfriend, too. Maybe I should just take a chance and see what happens. Maybe luck will actually smile on me with this gamble. Tsunade gathered her courage and stopped Naruto mid-stride. Naruto, feeling Tsunade stopped as well and turned to her. Tsunade, without saying another word, moved in front of Naruto, looped her arms around his neck and pulled him into a warm, loving kiss. Naruto responded after a moment and pulled her into it, too, both of them acting on synchronized instincts as they opened their mouths and began softly and gently caressing each other's tongues. Tsunade could feel Naruto smiling as he kissed her, bringing a smile to her own face through her kiss as well. They broke the kiss after several seconds, neither one taking their eyes off of the other, as Tsunade spoke up, "I'm sorry for turning away from you at the beach." She looked downward for a moment before turning back up to him and finishing, Listen, we agreed that we would date, right? That kind of makes you my boyfriend. And dating couples do things like kiss and such. So, are you comfortable with doing that with me? Naruto brought a gentle hand to her face and directed her gaze back towards his own. Seeing that she was looking him in the eye once more, he leaned in to kiss her once more, in much the same way that they had just finished kissing each other. They pulled back once more, and this time it was Naruto who spoke. Tsunade-chan, I care for you just like I care for the others. I appreciate everything you're doing for me, and yes, I'm quite comfortable with the idea of having a real dating relationship with you, even if it is just for educational purposes. I mean, come on, I slept in the same bed with my half-mother last night and kissed her in front of you. The idea of being involved with you really isn't that far-fetched when you think about that, is it? Tsunade could see the sincerity in his eyes. He wanted to fully engage in this, and she could also see that he wanted to make her happy, even if it was only for a little while. Thankful for his being so considerate, she immediately felt lighter. She smiled and nodded. You're right, Naru-kun. Let's enjoy this for all it's worth, okay? Naruto nodded in response with a smile of his own and kissed her once more before scooping her back into his arms and walking her back to the inn. The patrons in the common room sighted the pair of them the moment they walked through the front entrance, and the two of them were bombarded with cheers and catcalls all the way up the stairs. Once they reached the door to their suite, Naruto let Tsunade down. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Naru-kun. You're an excellent student, Tsunade praised. Thank you, he responded humbly. You know, Tsunade added, even though we've kind of already covered this, it's often considered welcome to kiss your date goodnight once you return home if it went well and she wants you to. Naruto smiled a little wider and kissed her once more. Once he pulled back, he opened the door and led her inside. Once inside and the door was closed, they heard Kushina's voice ask, well. Both of them turned to look in her direction to see Kushina, Mikoto and Haku looking at the two of them with giddy smiles and mischievous gleams in their eyes. It was quite nice, Tsunade answered vaguely before kissing Naruto in front of them. She then left for her room and glanced back at Naruto once more. Naru-kun, you did excellent tonight. We'll go out again in 2 days, okay? I'll still do the planning, because I have an idea of what activities I want to introduce you to, she instructed before entering her room and closing her door. Naruto turned his own gaze back to the others. Seeing that they were still anticipating details, he answered, I'll tell you all about it later. Naruto then went into Kushina's room and prepared to turn in for the night, leaving a trio of disappointed ladies in the living room. Minato Namikaze was tired. More and more people would comment on how he just didn't look well. It had been almost 2 full years since his precious little Naomi was given the inheritance she deserved, and he had finally flushed the waste that was his son out of his family and life. Things were supposed to be great after that. Instead, it seemed to mark the beginning of the end. For his family, for his happiness, if things kept going as they were, then for his tenure as Hokage as well. He reflected back on all of it as he had done many times in the past. It started with Kushina beating him and sterilizing him with one too many kicks to the groin. He'd learned that Naomi had been rendered infertile because that little bastard had hit her stomach way too hard. Kushina had left him and disowned Naomi after that, stating that she was a true Uzumaki, and true Uzumakis didn't abandon their own. She had further argued that Naomi was no Uzumaki because she didn't value anything that the Uzumaki clan held dear. Of course, she had been referring to the waste because he was family. What a joke. Naruto had been of no use to him, as Naomi had the Kyuubi's power, so he wasn't worthy or deserving of being family. Still though, If Naomi was more powerful than him, then how was it that Naruto had been able to hit her hard enough to cause the degree of injuries he'd caused her, with only 2 solid hits at that? Setting that aside, he continued thinking about how it all steadily got worse. He started losing the respect of his shinobi, and even many of the civilians. His daughter was now the target of the jeers and angry whispers that Naruto used to be subject to, and she wasn't handling it well. More and more of Konoha's business had closed their doors to him and Naomi ever since it all started with Tsuki Ichiraku. They were scared of their Hokage, scared of what he would do to them after what he did to his own flesh and blood, so they made sure that they kept him at a safe distance. They didn't think he had any reason to do to Naruto what he had done, and it somehow got around that he was just a sadist who would punish people simply because he didn't like them. How absurd. Of course, it didn't stop them from thinking that or acting on it, especially when Naruto's name always came back into the story. It enraged him, because he couldn't refute such an argument, and therefore, logic would completely justify their perspective. The civilian council was ecstatic about the demon disappearing, but was a little disappointed that it couldn't be given the public execution it deserved. Let them think Naruto was a demon. If their idiocy served his purposes, who was he to argue? The village elders, Kaharu, Homura, and Danzo were the most disappointed, since they couldn't turn the little diamond in the rough, as they called him, into their perfect little weapon like they had originally planned. They weren't fools. They had seen what Minato hadn't seen, and Minato was regretting it, now. They saw Naruto's potential from very early on. His intellect, his power, and his sheer tenacity. They had said it without shame. Naruto would outshine Naomi in every conceivable way, but he hadn't listened. He loved his little girl too much to even be able to believe that, despite the fact that deep down, he knew it to be true. So to make them happy, and to get Naruto out of his hair, they came up with the perfect plan. Minato would throw Naruto out of the house and out of the clan, and the 3 of them would take him in and train him. They would have their weapon, and he would have the only child he really wanted, a child that would bring true glory to his name and his village. What Minato hadn't counted on was Naruto's knowledge of exactly what it meant when he was disinherited. He had run away almost immediately. How he had done it, he couldn't begin to guess, but Naruto had all but disappeared. It was made worse when Kushina had wanted him to remain in the clan compound, and she had actually gotten worried for him, to the point where she'd made a spectacle out of his disappearance and her desire to find him. The elders couldn't act as effectively in bringing Naruto in, because Kushina would surely have gotten word of it and would likely have started snooping around to get the whole story. All they could do in the end was to discreetly put a bounty on the brat's head with the condition that he be returned alive to Konoha, and not even the bounty hunters that had taken up the task could find any remote trace of him. The Shinobi Council had lost a lot of respect for Minato because of his actions towards his only son. The original Ino-Shika-Cho trio, once great friends with Minato, were all appalled by his decisions. They were even more appalled when they found out why Minato did what he did, and the events that led up to it all. They berated Minato, while in council with everyone else, that Minato was nothing more than a monster and a traitor, with the whole story about Naomi showing more potential being a situation that he had purposefully created by deliberately leaving Naruto out of family and clan training. They reminded him of what he had told them when he married Kushina, that he would be so proud when he became a father in the future. Minato had just glowered in cold fury without saying a word after being humiliated and shamed in such a public fashion. The Ino-Shika-Cho trio thought that this incident was well-deserved on Minato, although they thought that it simply wasn't enough compared to what Minato had done and allowed to happen to his former son. Unfortunately, None of them had any connections to any important figures that could help in dealing more damage to their former friend, and they thought that no more damage would come Minato's way. They were pleasantly surprised at how nature just took its course within the village. Minato was reaping what he had sown with regards to his family, and now, whenever he preached about how the village was a family, it came back and bit him in the, usually in the form of some random villager shouting something like, "So you gonna kick us out, too?" in the middle of his speeches. While Minato made a mess of things with his own professional and personal life, the Shinobi Council got a new clan out of it. After Kushina's divorce from Minato, she separated the Uzumaki Namikaze clan into two clans, the Uzumaki and the Namikaze. Unfortunately, because of Naomi's devastating injuries to her person, the Namikaze clan had no actual heir, while Kushina had named Naruto the Uzumaki clan heir, much to Minato and Naomi's ire. Unfortunately for Minato and the Namikaze clan, Kushina hated Minato's guts for his actions towards their once united family, and she wouldn't even speak to Naomi, which hit the girl hard. He knew that there was no way of him patching things up with his ex-wife, since he would never take back anything that he had done to his former son. He then came up with what he thought was a brilliant idea, which would allow him to get Kushina back and their family reunited. "I'll just have someone discreetly find and kill that bastard. Then Kushina is bound to forget about him and make our family whole once more," he thought, a mixture of stupidity and insanity poisoning his mind. Even the part of his mind that was still rational was shouting back at him, "You idiot. If you do that, Kushina will know exactly who was responsible, and all you'll do is make things even worse. You know better than to believe such an insane and stupid idea. If you want Kushina back, give her what she wants." It was with that last thought that Minato squelched that part of his mind that was still capable of reason. Frustrated, he would deal with his Naruto problem later. There were still plenty of other things that he needed to fix. There was the issue of finding someone suitable to carry on as his heir, since Naomi was unable to have children. There were techniques and forbidden fūinjutsu that he could use to essentially write his own DNA into another shinobi or kunoichi, making that person his genetic son or daughter, techniques that only he and Kushina knew. Minato then remembered a rather interesting bingo book entry that he came across 4 months ago. He opened his copy of the bingo book and flipped to page 53. Name: Kakarot. Age: unknown. Gender: male. Affiliation: unknown. Rank: B-class ninja. Abilities: possesses a sword, so it is safe to assume that he knows kenjutsu, and is capable of chakra flow. Uses space-time ninjutsu to even greater effect than Konoha's yellow flash, and can use it in conjunction with his sword. Can also use some form of telekinesis. Other ninjutsu skills are unknown. Possesses abnormally high strength and speed. His skills in taijutsu are largely unknown. Uses a previously undocumented style that seems to stress power and speed. His skills in genjutsu are unknown. His skills in fūinjutsu are unknown. Description: wears a black full-body suit complete with head mask, along with a black, short-sleeved haori that reaches his knees. Martial art boots, and arm, shin guards. Has a double-edged short sword on his back. Additional note: Hyuga have tried to see underneath his mask to uncover his features, but they have not been able to succeed, suspected to have some kind of counter against dojutsu users, unsure if this also affects the Sharingan. Approach with extreme caution. After refreshing his memory of this Kakarot person, a plan began to form in his mind. He would get this young man to join Konoha, and under his thumb. If he did this, he could adopt the young man and perform the blood-related fūinjutsu on him. Then his family line could continue as Kakarot would be placed under the CRA in his name, and Naomi might even have a husband worthy of her. It would make no difference that they would be genetic half-siblings. Naomi wouldn't give him any children, anyway. He smiled darkly to himself as he started planning in earnest. Kakarot would be his son and heir, whether he wanted to be or not. Tsunade woke up much earlier than she had expected to. She felt energized, more energized than she had felt in a long time. Naruto was on her mind when she went to bed, and Naruto was the first thing that came to mind for her when she opened her eyes. She looked over at her alarm clock to see that the time was just past 4 o'clock in the morning. As wired as she now was, she knew that she wouldn't be getting any more sleep right now, so she decided to do something she hadn't done in years: take a nice pleasant walk in the quiet pre-dawn hours of the morning. Once she had thrown her usual clothes on, she quietly made her way out of the room and down the stairs towards the inn's exit. Once out on the road, she just enjoyed taking in the chirping of crickets that was the signature of the late night and early morning, broken only by the croak of the occasional frog. Her mind almost instinctively went to work on thinking of more activities that she could expose her new boyfriend to and do with him. A smile accompanied her thoughts, as she found that she was having fun just brainstorming about potential activities. We had dinner and a nice romantic sit-down on the beach last night. This time we should do something a little more involved. Maybe we could take in a play or a musical performance. Maybe there's a festival nearby that we could go to. What to do, what to do. As she was thinking about this, her eye caught a rather colorful poster on the side of a store as the light of dawn began to illuminate the town. On the poster was a picture of a man and a woman who were dancing with each other. Reading the details on the poster, which turned out to be an advertisement, she suddenly knew what she and Naruto would do. They would attend Wave's annual harvest ball, which would take place tomorrow night. This is perfect. I did tell him that I would expose him to things he hasn't done before, and I'm certain he hasn't done anything like this yet. It'll even give me a chance to teach him how to dance, thought Tsunade with mischievous glee. She could already imagine Naruto balking at the idea of going to a dance. Convincing him would actually be half the fun. Excited over the prospect of her Naruto-kun taking her out to go dancing, she continued to stroll through the empty streets, grateful for the clarity of thought that the early morning solitude provided her. She would return to the inn in a couple of hours to join everyone for breakfast before springing her plan on Naruto and the girls. Her contented smile took on a mischievous quality as she continued on her way. Naruto was awakened by the light of the early morning sun as it had risen just high enough to change from orange to yellow. He felt sleepy but refreshed. A sleepy female moan caused him to look down towards his chest to see a wild mane of red splayed out across both sides of him. He then noticed the weight on his body, telling him that Kushina had apparently rolled on top of him sometime in the night. She was lying on top of him and using his body as a mattress, the thought of which actually brought a smile to his face. He smiled even more as he realized that his arms were around her, holding her in place. She sleepily raised her head and gazed forward, staring through bleary eyes in a sleepy gape at Naruto. He noticed some drool from the corner of her mouth, but paid it no mind. He directed his smile at her for a few moments before her vision cleared and she slowly smiled back. "Good morning, Kushi-chan," he greeted her softly and warmly. "Good morning, Naru-kun," she greeted in kind. "Sleep well?" "Yeah, you." She moaned as she nodded her head in the affirmative. She pulled her knees forward until she was straddled on him before she pushed herself forward, closing her eyes and kissing him. He closed his own eyes and pulled her closer into him as he returned the kiss. Naruto slid his hands down to Kushina's thighs and up over her silk-clad cheeks, kneading them a few times before continuing up her back. He noticed as he ran his hands across her back that she was once again bare from the waist up. This caused him to notice her bare nipples rubbing against the skin of his own chest. He smirked into the kisses. She used one arm to rub her back more firmly while running his other hand through her silken red locks, bringing a smile to Kushina that Naruto could feel through their kiss as well. Kushina pulled away from him after a minute or so, smiling warmly as she told him softly, "I love you, my Naru-kun. I love you so much." She laid herself back down, turning her head so that she could lay her cheek across his chest while resting her hands on the far side of each of his pectorals. She began to speak wistfully, "I don't even really know when I fell in love with you. What happened 2 nights ago, all that really did was make me realize what I'd been feeling for a long time, already." Naruto hummed out in acknowledgement, gently caressing Kushina's back while just listening to her. She continued, "I remember the first few days after you'd left home, the point where I really started getting worried about you. Before I was hospitalized from exhausting myself, the only thing I could think was, Cammy, please let my baby boy be okay. I couldn't think of anything else besides finding you and bringing you home. I mean a real home, where things were going to change." She sighed before continuing, knowing that she still had Naruto's full attention by the way his touches felt against the bare skin of her back. "And as time went on, I just realized that I didn't even know you. And that hurt me and it terrified me." She heard Naruto sigh before she continued, "I realized that I couldn't recall a time where I'd ever seen you smile. I had certainly never done anything to make you smile. I was willing to do whatever it took to find you. I would have gone to the ends of the earth to find you, just so I could at least try to bring a smile to your face." She felt Naruto's hold on her tighten just a bit, indicating that he was trying to hold her just a little closer as he continued caressing her back. She smiled at his gesture. "I thought to myself, I wonder if he has a nice smile. Would he ever smile at me? If he did, would it reach his eyes? How would I react to seeing his smile? I can't tell you how hard Tsunade had to struggle to keep me from going back out and trying all over again to deplete my chakra and my body in my efforts to find you." She finished with a chuckle, bringing one from Naruto as well. Kushina continued after they both quieted down. "Mikoto, and Chuki and Ayame, they had all told me what they all knew of you, and I realized then just how little I truly knew. I felt so many things. Then, regret, remorse, I actually had to take some time to grieve. I just felt such loss. It was almost as if a loved one had died. It was that kind of loss. But there were other things I felt, too. I felt hope in your return. I felt excitement at being able to see the things they talked about in you. I also felt drawn in and attracted, even though I couldn't really make sense of it at the time. What they all told me, it made me want to get to know you intimately and closely. I wanted to touch your soul, and I wanted you to touch mine in return." Kushina's hands began to rub his pecs as she continued to tell her story. "And then, when Asuma told us that he'd ran into you on his way back in from that mission, and we wrote our letters to you, I was so eager to get a response back from you that, for those 4 days, I got almost no sleep at all. I couldn't stop thinking about getting some form of communication from you. And I couldn't stop thinking about you, either. The idea of seeing you, touching you, connecting with you, it didn't leave me. It couldn't leave me even if I'd wanted it to." She took a breath before speaking up once more. "I know that I had expressed a desire to essentially be the perfect mother to you in my first letter, but I didn't want that, deep down. I wanted this, what we have, right now, at this moment, but the idea of being the perfect mother to you was probably the closest I thought I'd ever be able to get to my true heart's desire." She slowly picked her head up and smiled, gazing longingly at Naruto with all the love she felt for him. Even now, it seemed surreal that, We're in bed together the way a husband and wife would be, and I've never been happier. And seeing your smile, especially when it's directed at me, well, it makes me giddy, like having butterflies in my stomach. Her smile became sad as she continued to gaze lovingly into Naruto's eyes, bringing a hand up to caress his face. Can't we just stay like this forever? Just you and me, my love, my soulmate. Naruto returned her sad smile with a faraway one of his own. That sounds wonderful, and that'll all come in time. I promise. His smile morphed into one of amusement. But for now, we do need to eat, dress, pee, stuff like that. Kushina signed in resignation. Yeah, I suppose that's true. We'll still have plenty of moments like this, anyway. Naruto nodded encouragingly, giving her a final peck on the lips as she rose from his body and stretched her arms upwards in a feline manner. Naruto couldn't help but appreciate the way she stretched with her upper body but still managed to jut out. Naruto, feeling somewhat playful, reached his palms and placed them both on her, keeping his hands open while rubbing and caressing her stretched mammaries, causing her to smile at him and then to bring her hands over his own. She used her hands to close his, wanting his hands to grip her so he could knead them. She then teased him just a little by sitting back just a bit and grinding her panty-clad mound against his boxer-clad bulge, causing it to harden slightly. Before their activities went too far for them to stop, she got out of bed and walked into the closet to put her robe on. I'll go ahead and get breakfast started, then. See you out there, Haim, Naruto responded understandingly, bringing a mildly astonished smile to Kushina's face before she pranced out of the room. Breakfast was just as lively as ever, at least for the girls. All four of them, including Haku, were chatting about girly stuff while Naruto just sat there at a loss and tried to listen as best he could, thinking that maybe he could glimpse a few tidbits about women and how to understand and treat them. Sadly, he came up with nothing. He had already finished breakfast and decided to excuse himself. Girls, I'll be downstairs, okay? He informed them. Kushina looked at him and nodded with a smile. He left the room and made his way downstairs into the common area. Once he got down there, Inari came up to him. Hey, Naruto, you wanna come out back and play with me and my friends? He asked with boyish excitement. Naruto gave him a cheerful grin. Sure. Sounds like fun. With that, Naruto followed Inari into the inn's backyard. His friends were all there, and they were getting ready to play touch football with Naruto as permanent QB. Hey, maybe, we should go grab poor Naruto, Mikoto suggested. We made him sit through all of our girl talk, so let's go get him and do something fun. The others all agreed and headed downstairs. When they reached the common room, Naruto was nowhere to be found. They all looked around for him, and when they didn't find him, Tsunade spoke out. Excuse me, she called. Does anyone know where Naruto is? Yeah, he's out back with the kids, one of the patrons, a dark-haired man with a mustache answered, pointing towards the back door with his thumb. Thanks. Kushina answered on behalf of her group as they all went out to the backyard to see Naruto playing touch football with the kids. Haku wore a knowing smile, which intrigued the other three. Curious, they all decided to sit and watch. They all seemed to be having the time of their lives, with Naruto's smile brightening up the whole field. When he saw the girls, he waved at them before returning his attention to the game. Apparently, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye, because he turned around and looked to the position that was behind him and a little to the right. The girls all followed his gaze to see a wheelchair-bound boy who couldn't have been older than 7. Naruto stopped the game for a moment before trotting over to the boy with a smile, the other kids following him, curious as to what he was going to say. Once he got to the boy, he squatted down and gave him a friendly smile. Hi there, Naruto greeted him. Haven't seen you around before. My name's Naruto. What's your name? Hi, sir, the boy began nervously. My name's Hosuke. Naruto waved off the formality. My friends all call me Naruto, Hosuke, and that's what you can call me, too, okay? Okay, Naruto, the now identified Hosuke replied. So, you wanna play some ball with us? Naruto asked him. Hosuke seemed downcast at that. I can't move my legs. I was born this way. At admitting this, he deflated and looked at the ground sadly. Well, maybe, Naruto answered, though his smile hadn't wavered in the slightest, but I'll bet that with always wheeling yourself around, your arms have gotta be really strong. I'll bet you can really throw a football. Hosuke's spirits seemed to lift as he picked his head up and offered an encouraged smile. Well, yeah, I can. He seemed to become discouraged once more. But I can't stand up so I can't see over everyone to throw it. And I can't move quickly enough because I can't use my legs. Naruto gave him a knowing smile. Well, you can, now. Naruto then proceeded to lift the boy out of his wheelchair and place him on his shoulders, because I'm gonna be your legs today. The girls were all touched by what Naruto did for this child. Kushina gasped in happy surprise at Naruto's gesture towards the unfortunate Hosuke. She watched in fascination as the boy's face lit up as if he couldn't contain the happiness he felt at that moment. None of the men she knew in Konoha would have paid this child any special attention, and she had to admit to herself that she would never have thought to, either. But here Naruto was, giving this boy an experience that anyone else would take for granted but that he would never forget. She was moved to tears at Naruto's kindness to the boy. They sat there for 2 full hours, Kushina's eyes never leaving the big blonde man who had the young cripple on his shoulders. Once the center hiked the ball, Naruto would give Hosuke the ball to throw to the receivers. He hadn't been kidding when he said he could throw a football. He had actually thrown it a bit too hard for the other boys to catch at first and had to learn to hold back his force a bit when passing. Naruto gave him the whole football experience. What it felt like to pass, what it felt like to run, what it felt like to get tackled and hit the ground. Hosuke looked like he'd never been happier in his life. He even thought that getting banged up with the rest of the boys on the field was great. Once all was said and done, Naruto returned an ecstatically happy Hosuke to his wheelchair. So, did you have fun, Hosuke? He asked with a warm, friendly smile. That moment hit Hosuke quite forcefully. As he processed what had just happened, he began to start crying. He threw himself forward and hugged Naruto with all his might. Naruto smiled as he understood the boy was crying because he was so happy and grateful for what Naruto did for him. He gently wrapped his arms around the boy, soothing him and telling him that it was okay to cry when happy. The other boys all came up and gave him pats on the back or the arm, all of them inviting him back out any time he wanted to come and wanting to be his friend. Kushina couldn't help but think that Naruto would make a spectacular dad one day. Never had she seen an adult show such kindness to a child. Her thoughts suddenly began to travel down a tangent. She thought about how Naruto would treat their children in the future. She blushed at this thought, and surprisingly to her, it didn't scare her or unnerve her in the least. After a moment's debate, she allowed herself to picture their possible future together. Her mind conjured up an image of Naruto playing with several red-haired and black-haired children, all sporting tails just like his, and sharing her and Naruto's features between them. She was sitting on a bench watching them all play, gazing longingly at them with all the love in the world. She was pregnant with another child. She would rub her belly and whisper sweet nothings to the developing little life growing inside of her. Naruto came over to do the same, with all of their children lining up to tell their newest sibling how much they all loved him or her. It was a scene that brought tears to her eyes. She blinked as she was brought out of her daydream by Tsunade's voice. Naruto, I'm coming over there. I'd like to have a look at Hosuke and see if I can't do anything for him. Sure, Su-chan. Come on over. He gestured to the woman, causing Hosuke to look over at her. Tsunade approached him and smiled in a motherly fashion. Hello, Hosuke. My name's Tsunade. Hello. He greeted her much more cheerfully. Well, the reason I wanted to look at you is because I'm well known as a doctor. I wanted to see if I could maybe help give you back your legs. Would you like that? Yeah. Thank you, he exclaimed, throwing herself at her and hugging her while laughing. She simply laughed and hugged him back. As Tsunade started making plans and began to wheel the boy back into the inn, Kushina, Mikoto and Haku all came up to Naruto and talked to him about eating lunch. Naruto led them all back inside where Tsunade was talking to Kaiza about using a room on the ground floor so she could perform a full medical exam on Hosuke. The pair, who seemed to be Hosuke's parents, were thrilled at the idea of the legendary Tsunade Senju examining and maybe being able to treat their son. He let Tsunade know where they were going to be so that she could join them when she was finished. Naruto and the girls minus Tsunade were sitting in the barbecue pit waiting for their food to get here. Kushina had snatched up the seat beside Naruto without saying a word to the other two, though Haku and Mikoto both backed down, seeing a certain gleam in Kushina's eye. They would let her have her way for now. When she wasn't talking, she was just staring at Naruto with a wondrous, faraway gaze, a wistful smile upon her lips. Her hands were on his arm, rubbing his skin softly and tenderly. Naruto and the others didn't know why, but they could tell that it seemed important to Kushina to be allowed this moment and this interaction with him. Mikoto and Haku decided to excuse themselves and go to the ladies' room. Once they had left, Naruto turned to Kushina and asked tactfully, "Everything okay?" "Not that I mind, but you're a little more touchy-feely than even you usually are." "I'm great, honey," she answered honestly as tears began to well into her eyes. "I just can't stop thinking about the wonderful things you did for that little boy. I've never seen someone be so kind to someone else." Kushina bit her lip as she looked downward, before remembering what kind of mother she used to be. Her tears of sentiment became tears of guilt. Naruto frowned in confusion. "I'm sorry," Kushina began explaining herself. "Seeing you with that boy made me think about what an incredible father you'll be one day. I just can't help but remember what a terrible mother I am." "Hey, that's enough," Naruto interrupted her softly, bringing his hand to her cheek and gently wiping tears away before resting it there. "I've forgiven you for that. You need to forgive yourself now. I know that you would never be the kind of mother you were before. It happened, yes, I know. I was there, you know," he chuckled before continuing, "but I can tell that you've learned from your mistakes, and you'd never be that kind of mother ever again. You'd be completely different, and I know that you wouldn't give any of your children any less love than the rest of them." "Okay," Kushina sniffled. "Okay, thank you for being so forgiving, and for being so patient with me. But please bear in mind that just like you said 2 nights ago, this is my burden to bear, and unlike you, I brought this burden on myself. Maybe I'll learn to forgive myself one day, but in the meantime," she trailed off for a few moments to try to find the words she wanted to use. Naruto smiled understandingly and finished her thought for her. "In the meantime, you just need me to be patient and reassuring, right?" She nodded with a sad smile, to which he responded by leaning in and kissing her. She closed her eyes and kissed him back for a few seconds before a cough interrupted them. They broke apart and turned to the source of the cough to see Tsunade there with a smirk on her face. "Good to see you two getting along so well," she offered coyly. Yeah," Kushina sheepishly muttered with a giggle. Naruto just nodded with a smile. A few moments after that, we find Mikoto and Haku returning from the ladies' room. Once they were all seated again, they placed their orders and waited for their lunch. Well, Tsunade began excitedly. I looked at Hosuke, and I think that I can help him. Really? Naruto asked immediately, leaning forward towards her. Yeah. What's going on with him is that part of his spinal column is being compressed by a slight excess of vertebral tissue. I can remove it and then handle the nerve damage, and then I can help him to develop the nerves in his lower extremities so that he can begin to flex the muscles and use them. You can do all that? Naruto asked, surprised at Tsunade's degree of ability and skill. Oh, you don't know the wonders of medical ninjutsu, Naru-kun. Tsunade answered with a knowing, teasing smile. I guess I don't. At that, he answered, suddenly intrigued by the possibilities of medical ninjutsu. Lunch came shortly after that, the meal being accompanied by animated and happy conversation between all of them. Haku had fit right in, acting and being treated like she'd always been a part of their little group of friends for who only knows how long. Tsunade shared the news about the dance with Naruto, which caused him to regard Tsunade somewhat dubiously, while the other girls almost squealed with delight. Naruto, upon seeing how excited the idea of being taken dancing had made all of them, happily acquiesced to Tsunade's plans, but made sure to inform her that he didn't know how to dance. Tsunade told him that she would give him all the instruction he would need over the next 2 days. Mikoto at this point spoke up. Tsunade, could you teach a few of Naruto's shadow clones how to perform the dance steps? I'm the only one of us who hasn't had a real chance to spend any time with him yet, and I'd like to do that for the rest of today and tonight. Tsunade nodded understandingly. Sure, that's fine. Naruto, when we leave here, make about 20 clones, okay? I'll make a few of my own so that we can cram as much dancing skill into that brain of yours between now and tomorrow night as we can. I can do that, he responded. Mikoto then addressed the redhead of the group. Kushina, do you mind if Naruto sleeps with me tonight? Kushina, however, wasn't quite as understanding as Tsunade was, as she asked with mild indignation, why? Actually, Kushina, Tsunade chose to interject. From Naruto's point of view, Mikoto is the one who has loved him the longest. I don't think she's being unreasonable here, and I also think you should respect her wishes. Kushina adopted a pouty frown and muttered, fine. Kushina, please, Mikoto pleaded with her friend, why shouldn't I be allowed time with him, both in bed and out of it? Kushina sighed with closed eyes. You're right, I know that you deserve it, probably more than any of us. It's just that, she paused to collect her thoughts. Well, it's just that he and I are finally starting to get to really know each other. And, what we're building right now is just, it's so important and precious to me that I don't want to lose any momentum. Kushihime, Naruto softly interrupted with a smile and a hand to her thigh, please don't feel that way. I treasure what we're experiencing as much as you do, and I promise you that we're not going to lose any speed over this. Are you worried I'll forget about you or something like that? Kushina pursed her lips together and nodded somewhat hesitantly. Naruto just smiled and reassured her. Please trust me, I won't. I promise you that. She still seemed to be wrestling with the idea a little bit, but she smiled and nodded some, thank you. I'm sorry, you too. I don't know why I reacted that way. It's okay, Kushi-chan. Naruto told her before anyone else could get a word in edgewise. If you feel like this again, we can just talk it out, okay? She smiled a little wider. A more natural and more grateful smile this time, okay. Again, I'm sorry. It's fine, Kushina, Mikoto answered this time. But please remember that I'm not out to steal him from you, either. I've stood by you all this time, and I'll continue to stand by you. I wouldn't betray you like that. I know, Mikoto, and you're right. I'll try to deal with my feelings better from now on. Mikoto simply smiled weakly and nodded, knowing that there was more to Kushina's feelings than even Kushina herself probably knew. She sent a glance in Tsunade's and Haku's direction, which both women responded to with a knowing nod. Once they had finished and paid for their meal, Naruto made several shadow clones for Tsunade before he and Mikoto left hand in hand. Tsunade took the clones with her while Kushina and Haku decided to have a girls' day together, window shopping and just taking in the bustling town. Everything is going according to plan, and Minato doesn't suspect a thing, thought Asuma Sarutobi, as he finished his daily training routine in the Senju clan's private training grounds. He wouldn't be able to train with Tsunade, Kushina, or Mikoto for the foreseeable future, but with the hell that they'd been through for the past few months, they deserved the vacation that they were taking. They had given him plenty to work on and master for the next couple of months without learning anything new, anyway. Asuma had always been an exemplary shinobi, but his growth in the past year and a half since he started his intensive training had been unprecedented. He knew that he would become much stronger training under 3A rank, borderline S rank ninja, but even he hadn't expected the degree of growth that he was experiencing. He could now keep up with them in just about every respect, probably being a low S rank ninja himself. He knew that he could beat Kakashi Hatake in pretty short order, and he was also sure he could probably beat Jiraiya as well, right now, but he wasn't satisfied with that. He wouldn't be satisfied until he surpassed Minato Namikaze in power, skill, and in every way that counted as a ninja. His taijutsu training, which was mostly under Tsunade, had improved by leaps and bounds. She had also helped him dramatically refine his chakra control, which had greatly improved not only the strength of his jutsu, but their precision as well. She even taught him the basics of her super strength technique, which he was totally blown away that she would choose him of all people to pass the technique on to. When possible, he would also enlist Might Guy's help. He had oddly enough expected an uphill battle from Guy in convincing him to coach Asuma, and had been pleasantly surprised by his immediate cooperation. Guy himself had been shouting out at the top of his lungs about how unyouthful the Hokage was for abandoning his son during his morning training, almost every single day, which had actually driven a wedge between him and his former eternal rival, Kakashi. Guy, knowing that Naruto was a good kid even though he'd never had the chance to meet him personally, was delighted when Asuma had approached him about training and coaching. Guy, of course, being much sharper than he let on, was able to deduce Asuma's motives, and this only served to seal the deal for him. So whenever Guy could, he and Asuma would meet on a public, but out-of-the-way training ground in order to keep the Hokage's suspicion at bay. In addition to supplementing Tsunade's taijutsu training, Guy also helped him to refine what Tsunade had been teaching him so that Asuma could make better use of it given his speed, chakra nature, and even his incredible height and reach. Tsunade only stood at 5 feet 3 inches in height, where Asuma was a giant at 6 feet 5 inches. Some of Tsunade's techniques simply weren't as effective because of Asuma's longer reach, and it was with areas such as this where Guy helped him to tweak the styles he was learning. Guy was also giving him speed and strength training, something that Tsunade, and even Kushina, both found themselves immensely grateful for. Of course, much to Asuma's chagrin and Tsunade's, Kushina's and Mikoto's amusement, this also had the unintended side effect of making him Guy's new eternal rival. His kenjutsu training, which Kushina supervised, had improved just as much if not more than his taijutsu. Kushina had taught him the basics of her whirlpool-style kenjutsu, so he could create his own based on her style, and he was coming along with it quite well. She even helped him with his chakra flow techniques, which, with his wind nature, made them much more deadly. He was able to take what he learned from both his taijutsu training and his kenjutsu training and put it to great use with his trench knives. Even though he was great with taijutsu and was only getting better, and while his kenjutsu skills were really taking off, it was his armed taijutsu that made him stand out more than anything else. Asuma was a wonder to behold when he fought with his trench knives. Nobody else in Konoha fought the way he did. His style was self-invented, and it had gotten him out of many a scrape where he might have died had he not developed it. His abilities with his trench knives would now easily put him into any cage's league, assuming that he wasn't disarmed, which was why he was also striving to improve in every other area, as well. While he didn't increase his use of genjutsu as much as he liked, he was able to improve his overall ability to dispel genjutsu, both with regards to shortening the time it took him and the level of genjutsu that he could dispel. He would have asked Kurenai Yuhi, who was Konoha's genjutsu mistress as well as his girlfriend, to help him, but he didn't want to directly involve her in his plans. It wasn't that he didn't trust her. He deeply cared for her and would trust her with his life. But he knew that if she were to get in the middle of a battle between two cage-level shinobi, she would be critically injured, and likely killed. It was just that simple. On top of that, he certainly didn't want Namikaze to be able to use her as leverage against him should his plans get exposed. He had even discussed the matter with his coaches, and for now, it was decided that the fewer people that knew what he, Tsunade, Mikoto, and Kushina were planning, the better chance it had of success with the lowest chance of collateral damage. The only reason they allowed Guy's involvement was because they knew that Guy could more than handle himself if things were to escalate out of control. His abilities in fūinjutsu, which Kushina also instructed him in, skyrocketed from just over beginner level to high journeyman level. Kushina frequently praised the speed at which he was picking up the art, especially since he didn't have so much as a drop of Uzumaki blood running through him. He was able to apply seals in the middle of battle now, and had a good grasp on seal arrays. His most improved field, however, was his ninjutsu. Mikoto had been a slave driver, and because of this, he had been able to decrease the number of hand signs he needed for all of his jutsu, even so far as to eliminate the need for them on many of his techniques. At the same time, he was able to increase his proficiency with the current techniques that he has in his repertoire. Before the women left on their vacation, they had given him their latest assessment. They told him that if he continued his training at the rate he was going, that he would easily be cage level around the time of the Chunin exams, which excited him more than anything. Suddenly finding a new burst of energy at remembering his goal, he started his training over from the top, smiling all the while. "Your training's really coming along, Asuma," the familiar female voice of the Senju compound's sole remaining resident praised. "Thanks, Shizune," he responded to the sweet-faced medic, who was smiling pleasantly and disarmingly. "I'm surprised you're here, though. Early shift." "Yeah, the staff at the hospital think I've been working a little too hard lately, but with the others gone, well," Shizune shrugged with a slight grimace, "it's either work or sit here bored at home." Asuma frowned at that. "How come? Why not head out on the town? You never know, you might just meet somebody," he finished somewhat suggestively. Shizune blushed at the implication. "Well, you see, she paused as she considered how best to phrase her reasons. "I'm kind of hoping that when Naruto comes back," she trailed off and began poking her index fingers together with a shy smile. Asuma got her meaning and finished her thought. "I gotcha. Don't worry, Shizune, I'll be sure to put in a good word for you with him when he comes back. Coming from me, it'll go a long way." "Really? You'd do that?" she asked hopefully. "Of course, I would. Besides, knowing him as well as I do, I think he'd really like a lady like you. Touched, Shizune offered him a grateful smile. Thank you, Asuma. That really makes my day. Asuma grinned and nodded. No problem. Well, I gotta run. Date with Kurenai-chan tonight. Tell her I said hello. Will do, he replied as he waved to her while running out of the compound on his way back to his apartment. Mikoto led Naruto through the streets of town with no real destination in mind. All she wanted was time with Naruto. Of course, Naruto certainly wasn't complaining. When this trip had been proposed, it was Mikoto that he had been looking forward to seeing the most. Of the three, his relationship with her was the strongest, and ever since he met her, he'd had a bit of a crush on her. Mikoto looked around before pointing to her left and exclaiming, "Over there." Naruto, in his confusion, raised an eyebrow and gazed in the direction the black-haired beauty was pointing, only to see what looked like a trail leading into a small wooded area. They walked into the woods, Mikoto leading him onto smaller and less beaten pathways. Figuring that he would know what she was up to soon enough, he simply followed her lead without asking questions. After traversing about half a mile, the wooded area opened up, surprisingly into a small cove of rocks surrounding a small section of beach, only accessible either by that trail or by sea. Once they were a few feet into the cove, Mikoto turned around and wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck, resting her chin on his shoulder while Naruto, after getting over the initial surprise, wrapped his arms around her back, holding her in place as comfortably as he could. "Cammy, I've missed you so," Mikoto said into his ear as just above a whisper. "I haven't been able to really tell you just how much with the others around. I just want to be alone with you for a while." "I've missed you, too, my Mikoheim," Naruto responded just as softly. "Of all of you, I've been looking forward to seeing you the most." Mikoto tightened her hold on him, while he in turn did the same. "Narukoi," Mikoto addressed him, making no secret of her feelings for him as she began to ask him in a quivering voice, "Why didn't you at least come talk to me before you left?" Naruto sighed sadly, knowing a question like this one would come sooner or later. "I'm truly sorry. I was enraged at the time, and I just wasn't thinking clearly enough to be able to make that kind of a judgment call. I know that's not really an excuse, but it's okay, honey," Mikoto interrupted. "I just needed to hear your answer, and believe me, given what happened, I can understand how you weren't necessarily in the best frame of mind to make a choice that made everybody who cared for you at the time happy." Naruto pulled back just enough so he could look into Mikoto's eyes. He saw that she had begun to shed tears, though her eyes and her smile were both filled with love. Naruto closed his eyes and leaned forward, touching his forehead to hers, taking in her scent. He felt her own head relax and lean against his own before he felt her lips on his. He returned her kiss, allowing her to pull back after a few seconds. Naruto brought one of his arms underneath her legs and scooped her into a bridal carry before walking over to the rocks. He seated himself on a rock that was contoured in such a way that was conducive to sitting, while seating her in his lap-side saddle, while she was still facing him. Mikoto began anew, her voice still quivering. "I would have made sure you were safe, in my home. The truth is that, I would have even shared my bed with you, then. My whole world had just fallen apart, and I know yours had, as well. Her voice broke. "I just wish we could have been there for each other, Narukoi." Naruto wrapped his arms around Mikoto, pulling her in and allowing her to cry her grief away into him. She cried into his shoulder, her own arms never having unwrapped themselves from around the back of his neck. As she continued to cry, Naruto caressed her back while strumming his fingers through her silky black tresses. "I'm sorry, Miko-chan," Naruto expressed regretfully. "I truly am." I had no idea you were willing to go that far for me, especially at that time. I was, Mikoto replied. It's been so hard there without you, honey. My eldest is a traitor to the village. My youngest wants nothing to do with me, and the rest of the village looks at me with suspicion because of my estrangement from Sasuke. Naruto, the only real joy I find these days comes from you. Thoughts of you, plans that we make around you. Ever since our vacation plans were finalized, only thoughts of spending time with you kept me looking and moving forward. Miko-chan, the same is true for me, too. Mikoto pulled back and looked at him in mild surprise. What? It's true, he responded with a sad smile. I love Haku, and I'm starting to fall in love with Kushina and Tsunade, but I've been in love with you, for years now. If I was told that the only way I could be happy was to take you and live on a remote island somewhere, and never have contact with any form of humanity or civilization ever again, I would have taken the offer without even thinking about it. Mikoto gasped and smiled wide, tears once again rolling down her face. Naruto continued, Mikoto, you hold a special place in my heart that nobody else will ever have. Granted, I have other loves, now, but, you're my first love. But I had no idea that you've wanted me, ever since the night your husband was killed, and maybe even longer than that. Mikoto nodded, affirming his guess. It's true. Honestly, even if things hadn't happened the way they had, I would have left Fugaku anyway, and even when you were only 8 or 9, I found myself daydreaming about what you'd look like once you got older. She blushed as she added, although I do have to admit I didn't ever imagine you'd have golden blonde hair. I think it's very sexy. It really suits you well, Koi. Naruto looked at her in brief confusion before remembering a moment later. Oh yeah, that's right, I'm in my Super Saiyan form right now. Mikoto raised a dubious eyebrow. How do you forget something that supposedly has such a drain on your energy? Honestly, I don't even feel the drain anymore. I can stay in my base Super Saiyan form indefinitely. I've even been sleeping like this. Really? Mikoto asked, to which Naruto nodded before Mikoto continued, catching what Naruto said. Wait a minute, you said your base Super Saiyan form. Does this mean there's a Super Saiyan form beyond this one? Yeah, several, in fact. So far, the highest state I've reached is that of an ascended Super Saiyan, which I like to call Super Saiyan 2, while this form is Super Saiyan 1. Part of my current training includes trying to get to Super Saiyan 3, but I can already tell I've got my work cut out for me. Mikoto simply smiled at him. I believe in you, Naruto Koi. I know you'll get there. Thanks, Miko-hime. Naruto responded with a grateful smile of his own. So, Mikoto began in an exaggeratedly extravagant manner, changing the subject. Regale me with tales of your adventures and your deeds of daring-do. Naruto laughed warmly before fully indulging her, disclosing everything that he hadn't told her previously. She experienced every emotion she could have imagined feeling, from joy and ecstasy, to unbridled rage and fury, from heartache and sadness, to gut-wrenching terror. Naruto's flair for narration and storytelling literally put her into the tale in her own mind. Mikoto found herself regretting that she couldn't be a part of those previous adventures. His recounting of his experiences to her left her astonished and stunned. Have you ever thought about writing a book based on your own life story? Mikoto asked both sincerely and earnestly, because your story is amazing, and you have such a flair for telling it that I could imagine myself there with you. Well, I dunno, he began a little nervously, not sure of how receptive he was to the idea. No, I really mean it. Mikoto pressed the issue. You've seen things that are amazing. You've done things that are amazing. I think people would love to read your adventures. Naruto seemed to ponder it for a moment before answering in a non-committal fashion and changing the subject. I guess we'll see. But for now, I want to know about your life, even the stuff from before I was born. Mikoto didn't have the same talent for storytelling that Naruto did, but she told him of herself as best she could, even going so far as to reveal things that she'd never before told anyone. What stood out to him the most was when she told him of her heartfelt desire to have a daughter, a dream she'd never shared with anyone because she knew Fugaku only wanted sons. She added that her dreams of family now included at least one son and one daughter by Naruto. Beyond being a part of his plans and his dreams, she had no real dreams of her own. Being an integral part of Naruto's life and world was the only thing she truly wanted. Naruto was pleasantly surprised to learn that in her desire to somehow feel closer to him in his absence, she had deliberately gone out of her way to acquire a taste for ramen that rivaled his own. She told him of ramen eating contests that she and Kushina started having with each other around once a month or so, which usually ended in a tie, though there were a few where Kushina won. She'd been eating ramen all her life, after all, whereas poor Mikoto just started her ramen obsession recently. This had apparently fueled further training for both of them so that they could burn the extra calories and keep their weight down. The two of them spent the next several hours alone by themselves in that hidden little cove, just catching up and sharing the deepest things about themselves with each other. As the sun started getting lower in the sky, both of their stomachs began to rumble. Naruto suddenly got what he thought would be a brilliant idea about dinner for the two of them. He created a shadow clone to go to the inn and inform the girls that he and Mikoto would be returning home late tonight, while he took her into town to get some things. While Naruto and Mikoto went off to spend their time together, and Tsunade had taken the clones to teach them all how to dance and to give them practice, Haku and Kushina went off together to have some girl time and bond further. They both went to a day spa in town to pamper themselves and relax, receiving hot stone and aromatherapy massages, various hair and skin treatments, and detoxification time in a hot steam room. Once finished, they both went to the public bathhouse and bathed for a while. Seeing that the two of them were in a private enough setting, Haku seized the opportunity to address both Naruto's and her concerns. Kushina-chan. She began. Yeah, are you okay? Kushina frowned in confusion as she turned to the younger black-haired woman. Yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask? Well, I don't mean to offend or pry, but you seemed really bothered by the idea of Naruto-kun spending time with Mikoto-chan and not you. Well, I don't feel jealous, if that's what you're implying, she interrupted, somewhat guardedly and defensively. That's not what I mean, Haku reassured her, raising her own hands in a calming gesture. What I mean is that, the idea of being away from Naruto for even a short period of time, well, the best way I can put it is that it seemed to really frighten you. Kushina's frown became a thoughtful one at Haku's observation. Question. It was true, the thought of being separated from her former son absolutely terrified her. On some level, she knew that she was being irrational and paranoid, but since she'd been hoping so badly for so long that she'd get the chance to be in his life after she had so heinously driven him away, she couldn't help but feel almost panicky about being separated from him. There were so many plaguing insecurities. What if he remembered more of the things she'd done to him and decided that she wasn't worth the risk of having his heart potentially broken again? As despicable as she was, at least in her own mind, there were so many better women out there for him than her. And what if he found women that were better for him and forgot all about her? Kushina began nervously and quietly. You're right about that, Haku-chan. It does frighten me. Kushina just stared off into the steam that was rising off the water for several seconds before turning back to Haku. How much do you know about Naruto-kun's history with me? Only what he told me the night that you all checked into the inn. That you, Mikoto and Tsunade were from his home village and that at least one of you was a potential CRA candidate for him along with me. That's really it. Kushina smiled nervously before adding, Haku-chan, did you know that I'm his mother? Haku blinked and shook her head as though she hadn't heard correctly. Wait a minute, you're his what? That's right. I'm the woman who birthed him, and I'm the woman who was responsible for driving him away from his home. Tsunade was supposed to be his godmother, but she never interacted with him at all. She just never made any room in her thoughts for him. Mikoto was the only one of us that Naruto knew cared for him. But, if you're his mother, then, why are you and he? She sputtered, moving her hands and pointing her fingers this way and that. Kushina decided to take pity on the shocked young woman and finish her question for her, sharing a bed. Well, it turns out that even though I did give birth to him, he and I aren't genetically related because of something that happened to him while he was still in my womb. Haku seemed to settle down after this, but then Kushina dropped a rather large bombshell on her. But honestly, even if he was my genetic son, it still wouldn't matter to me. I would still love him as you do, and I would still want to be his wife and build a family with him. Oh, Haku responded while maintaining her composure as best she could. But I think that we've gotten off topic. Kushina continued. As far as my fear of being separated from him, well, I know that if he ever decided that he wanted to leave me, he'd be completely within his rights to do so after everything I did to him as a child. I guess I'm just scared that he'll find someone better and forget all about me, you know. Or maybe I'll do something that makes him remember all the horrid things I did, or even all of the things I didn't do, and he'll decide that staying with me just isn't worth it. Haku couldn't help the sympathetic grimace that crossed her beautiful features. Kushina-chan, even though you're just getting to know him again, I think you do know him better than that. Do I, though? Kushina interrupted, her fear causing her voice to rise in pitch and volume. I've had to come to terms with the fact that I know almost nothing about him. I really don't know what's going to happen. Then I'll tell you what I know about him. Haku interrupted right back. He'd never do that. Naruto is unswervingly loyal to those he loves, and the fact that he's giving you a chance to be in his life, especially after everything that's happened between the two of you, should show you that he does love you, and that he always has. Kushina closed her eyes and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. You're right, Haku-chan. And I can only hope that this fear I have will go away on its own. She opened her eyes and smiled. I'm glad that Naruto has you, though. And that you're here with me right now, Haku-chan. Haku smiled back and took the redhead's hand under the water. As a loved one of Naruto's, you're a loved one of mine, too, Kushina-chan. Isn't this what we sister wives are supposed to do for each other? Kushina laughed in response as she squeezed Haku's hand gently. Yeah, I suppose it is. The two of them just spent the rest of their time getting to know each other, the topic of their favorite-tailed young man being frequently revisited. Mikoto found the idea of a romantic beachside picnic in that little cove to be a wonderful idea. Naruto had made a clone to return to the inn so he could inform the girls that he and Mikoto would be out for a while longer, and to not wait up for them. He knew that Tsunade was likely back there, as the clones he had created and sent with her had since dispelled and dumped the dance moves he'd learned and the muscle memory he'd acquired into his head. She and Naruto then went back into town to do some shopping. Mikoto picked up a few odds and ends, and Naruto had picked up a large picnic blanket and some takeout from various places. Naruto also went and got 4 tiki torches so that they could enjoy their picnic dinner by candlelight. Mikoto actually stopped him from buying the two of them any swimwear. When Naruto turned to her to ask her why, all he got in response was a sultry smirk. They made their way back to the cove they had left a couple hours prior, arriving as the twilight sky was in the midst of morphing into a deep navy blue to the east, while still a shade above royal blue to the west of them. Naruto set the large blanket down on the sand, allowing Mikoto to sit, but Mikoto insisted on helping Naruto set the torches up. Naruto planted the tiki torches, one at each corner of the blanket, and Mikoto used a weak fire jutsu to light each one. Both of them enjoyed their dinner, which was nothing more than a series of appetizers, ranging from dango, to pork balls, to skewers of teriyaki chicken, and even fish and vegetable kebabs. Naruto had even picked up some ramen, but to his surprise, Mikoto had been the pickier of the two regarding that, saying that it didn't compare to Chuki's ramen. Naruto realized that from his perspective it had been so long since he'd eaten Chuki's ramen that he had forgotten just how good it really was. After dinner, Mikoto and Naruto were lying on the blanket, Mikoto with her back to Naruto while leaning into him and Naruto with a hand around her stomach, while strumming his fingers slowly through her beautiful, silken raven tresses. They were talking quietly about their dreams for the future, particularly the dreams that directly centered around the two of them. After a while, Naruto looked up at the stars and noticed that they were coming out in greater clarity. He could see them starting to twinkle and change color. He pointed this out to Mikoto much the same way he had with Tsunade the night prior. Mikoto found herself just as amazed as Tsunade was, even more so as she activated her Sharingan to enhance her vision and commit to permanent and perfect memory what she saw. Mikoto suddenly gained a sparkle in her eyes that was a strange mixture of mischief and sensual love. At that moment, she jumped up, grabbed Naruto's hands and tugged. Naruto immediately rose to his feet in response and allowed Mikoto to pull him from the blanket towards the water. After pulling him a few feet, she let go of his hands, placed her own hands to the sides of the back of his head, and pulled herself into his face for an intense, passion-filled kiss. Naruto went with it and instantly started kissing her back with just as much passion and intensity while snaking his arms around her back and pulling her body into his own. A few minutes later, they broke for air, or at least that's what Naruto thought. Mikoto took 3 quick steps back and yanked her summer dress over her head, revealing her lacy undergarments to reveal a black lace bra and panty set that complemented her generous curves immensely. She quickly unhooked her bra, freeing her jutting from their confines and allowing their swell to expand, and just as quickly pulled down and stepped out of her panties. Once she'd done this, she pounced onto Naruto, knocking him to the ground while shoving her tongue into his mouth once more. This time, however, before Naruto could move to hold her, she quickly got up, ran backwards for 3 steps before turning around and making a beeline for the ocean, looking back at Naruto with a playful smile before reaching the water and diving in once she was thigh-deep in water. Naruto realized that he had just been teased and played, and it had what he guessed was Mikoto's intended effect. Naruto couldn't help but be even more tantalized by her. He had risen to his feet as he saw her emerge through the surface of the waves, facing him. He watched as she rose to her feet slowly, the glistening water flowing down her skin, giving her an ethereal, almost otherworldly air. She smiled sultrily once more while using her head to beckon him to her. Naruto grinned, stripped out of his clothes almost as quickly as Mikoto had, and then vanished. Before she could even get a good look at his body, too. Before Mikoto could process her confusion, she felt 2 strong but gentle hands cup her from behind. Gasping, she turned her head to see Naruto behind her. His smile was just as playful as hers had been, and now he was the one doing the teasing. "How'd you do that?" she asked him, intrigued with his technique. "It's called instant transmission. If I know where a place is, or I can sense something or someone that I want to get to, I can teleport there faster than the speed of light. So yeah, 2 can play this little teasing game, my beloved Mikoheim." Mikoto's smile dropped from playful to genuine and warm as she slowly turned around and placed her arms around Naruto's neck. Naruto, likewise, had allowed his hands to simply slide around her body as she shifted so that they were now resting on her back. Mikoto gasped as Naruto fell back, pulling her with him, allowing himself to be immersed in the water while keeping Mikoto above its surface. He swam a few more yards out until it was just deep enough for him to reach the bottom with his feet. Mikoto was a little too short to be able to stand in the water, so she used his body to keep herself above water, which she realized was his intent. She leaned in to kiss him once more. Naruto's lips met hers halfway before their mouths opened and their tongues began their sensual dance with each other. Naruto's hands once more moved to Mikoto's waist, gently but firmly holding her in place above the waves. "I love you, my Naru, Koi," Mikoto said softly to him between kisses. "I love you too, Miko, Haim," Naruto replied, also between kisses. Mikoto removed one hand from behind his neck and lowered it into the water. She smiled and Naruto gasped when she found what she was feeling for, Naruto's manhood. In his shock, Naruto pulled out of the kiss, though he didn't let go of Mikoto's waist. Mikoto's smile turned into a frown of confusion. "What's wrong, my love?" Naruto didn't respond verbally, but Mikoto could see a hint of fear in his eyes. She knew it wasn't traumatic in nature, but she could still see it there. She understood after pondering what she was seeing for a few seconds. "Naru Koi, is this something you've never done before?" Mikoto asked slowly and carefully, making sure to keep her tone calm and understanding. Naruto closed his eyes and shook his head in the negative. Mikoto brought the hand that was at his organ up to his face, brushing his cheek with her fingertips. When he opened his eyes at her touch, he saw a warm and understanding smile gracing her angelic features. "If you're uncomfortable with this, we don't have to," she offered in an attempt to ease his burden. "It isn't that I'm uncomfortable with the idea of doing it, but, well, I guess I just always pictured my first time being the night I got married, you know." Mikoto's understanding smile never changed, and she nodded in reply, "I do understand. But I'll offer you this, with your CRA, I already feel as if I'm married to you, and all a ceremony would do is make it official. I feel the same way, but, I dunno, there's something about giving the vows in front of witnesses in that moment that makes it special, you know. At least that's the way I see it." Mikoto seemed saddened by his reluctance to couple with her, but at the same time she was in awe of and touched by the purity of his heart. An idea suddenly came to her. "Listen, Naruto-kun, if you want to be married first, then let's just give our vows to each other right here and now." "Say what? I'm serious. The gods themselves can be our witnesses. It's really not that." His eyes widened as he heard his closest companion and oldest mentor speak. "Hey Naruto, if you need a witness right here, I'll be the witness for you." Mikoto frowned in confusion at Naruto's sudden pause. "Goku, you're not serious, are you?" "Sure, why not? She loves you, and you have a witness, so if that was your only objection, then you can marry her." Naruto blinked and shook his head, trying to make sense of what he was being goaded into doing. Deciding to simply go with it, he looked at Mikoto and told her, "Well, Goku's just agreed to be our witness." Naru Koi, isn't Goku trapped inside your mind?" "Well, yeah, but he can still see and hear what goes on out here, unless I cut the connection." "So, does that mean?" Mikoto began excitedly. Naruto smiled and told her, "Mikoto Uchiha, I hereby promise to love you as my wife. I promise to love you with all my heart, body and soul, through the great times, through the rough times, through whatever happens. I promise to love, honor and cherish you as your husband. Will you accept my promise as it is right now?" Mikoto began to cry as she grinned and nodded, "Yes." Naruto Uzumaki, I hereby promise to love you as the only husband that I'll ever have from now until my time on this earth ends. I'll love you with all that I am, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness, and in health. I promise to love, honor, and keep you faithfully as your wife. Do you accept me as I am and as I've promised? I do, Naruto exclaimed before leaning in to kiss her with all the passion he could muster, Mikoto not even hesitating to do the same. And now you're married, at least in your hearts and in spirit. Naruto, now might be a good time to break the link, Goku suggested, getting a little antsy as Naruto and Mikoto began to start making progress. Naruto cut the connection to Goku, but had slowed down his kissing to a more softly passionate pace, Mikoto matching him and adding to the softly romantic air that was suddenly being created. Mikoto brought her arms back up around Naruto's neck, but this time she also wrapped her legs around his midsection, linking her ankles together in the back and locking her in place around Naruto's body. She moved to grab Naruto's hard shaft once again, and this time, he did not flinch, resist or pull away. She guided him to her waiting entrance, and once she sensed that his tip was in the right place, she lowered her floating body, allowing her canal to encase him completely. Both of them moaned and gasped in pleasure as Mikoto sank down, taking Naruto all the way to his hilt. Honey, how is this? Mikoto asked with both joy and concern for his comfort level knowing that he was a virgin. This feels incredible, he told her as he just enjoyed the sensation of being buried inside the woman he had just exchanged vows with. Great. Now, I'm going to start moving slowly, okay? She asked him breathlessly, to which he nodded, his eyes beginning to glaze over. Mikoto began to slowly move up and down the length of her husband's rod, using her elbows to prop her arms on his shoulders as her hands began to stroke his face and her fingers strummed through his hair. She continued this slow, up and down motion as she began to give Naruto soft kisses, her tongue slowly brushing against his as she taught him about passion in tenderness and subtlety. Naruto's instincts began to take over as he began moving in sync with Mikoto while being careful to match her speed and not go too fast. She was amazed at how well he was following her cues and hints. Naruto then held her to him with one arm while his other arm circled around her front and began playing with her gently and softly, bringing breathless gasps from his wife. I love you, Mikoto began to whisper repeatedly to Naruto as she began to pick up speed, encouraging him to do the same. Naruto began to whisper the same words back to her as he picked up her cue and started moving faster himself. The two of them began gyrating with each other faster and faster, their whispered declarations of love becoming louder until they were loud cries of love, both of them moving steadily faster. Both of them yelled out their love for each other as they reached their first climax together, Mikoto coming to another orgasm almost immediately after coming down from the first at the feeling of Naruto's hot seed firing inside of her body. Once the two of them were spent, Naruto carried her out of the water while she was still connected to him and brought her back to the blanket where he turned and allowed himself to drop onto his back, Mikoto softly landing on top of him. She separated from him and laid down at his side, her leg draped over his stomach and his pelvis. I love you, my beautiful Mikoto Haim. Naruto managed to get out between gasps as he pulled her into his side with the arm he wrapped around her. I love you so much, my Narukoi, Mikoto replied breathlessly, though she had recovered her own breath much more quickly. She laid a hand on his bare chest before leaning in and kissing the spot just outside where her hand was laying. My husband, my love, that just feels right to me, looking at you, Mikoto told him. Naruto gave her a tired smile. Me too, my angel. Me too. They took a few moments to recover their energy. Mikoto, realizing that Naruto probably wasn't ready for children at this point yet, used a birth control jutsu to prevent herself from becoming pregnant. Once they were recovered, they got up, and Mikoto tried to recover her clothes, but Naruto was faster. Naruto quickly sealed the blanket, the torches and their clothes into an empty scroll before making a shadow clone and making it henge into himself but clothed. The shadow clone then made his way to the inn so that he could deposit everything back into their room. Mikoto looked on in confusion and shock as she realized that the clone was making off with both their clothes. Naruto took advantage of her surprise by scooping her into a bridal carry and taking off in flight like a bullet out over the water and then upwards once they were about a mile out. Like Kushina, Mikoto's breath was completely taken away by Naruto's ability to defy gravity and soar through the air like a falcon. Naruto carefully took her hand and released her from the bridal carry, allowing her to fly on his outstretched arm, holding his hand so that she wouldn't fall. The wondrous, ecstatic grin on her face brought a happy one to his own. Naruto flew her through the night sky, descending slightly over certain uninhabited spots over the islands surrounding wave country. Mikoto drank it all in with spectacular amazement as Naruto guided her over high peaks lush with greenery and wild vegetation, to fly her by, and sometimes through, waterfalls that were descending from the high cliffs in these areas. Even though getting drenched again, Mikoto seemed to not notice that she was still as the day she was born, but she idly thought that the feeling of the cool night breeze over all of her exposed skin as they flew through the air felt invigorating. Naruto himself noted some of the vegetation and animal life that roamed these jungles and thought that many of the animals would make for a great meal. This would make a great hunting ground. He also noticed a lot of wild edible fruits and vegetables, as well as many strong herbs and wild spices that he could use to flavor his food with. This would be a great place to take the girls, or at least one of them, for another picnic, and what made it even better was that they would only need to bring drinks with them, since Naruto could hunt and forage their dinner right there. Keeping that idea in the back of his mind, he returned his attention to the raven-haired angel whose hand he was holding and smiled lovingly at her. Mikoto was smiling back with just as much love, tears of joy flowing from her eyes. Naruto pulled her in and righted himself, bringing her into his body and pulling her into a searing, love-filled kiss, spinning the two of them as he ascended back into the sky. He then flew off towards the direction of home, knowing that it was nearing midnight and the girls were likely all in bed by now. By the time he approached the inn, he had brought his precious Mikoto back into a bridal carry as he slowly descended, softly touching down upon the balcony after making sure that nobody apart from their room's other occupants could see them, and Naruto could sense that they were all asleep. Not putting her down, he opened the sliding glass door using one of his feet before stepping over the threshold and closing the door with his foot. Once inside, he made his way to Mikoto's bedroom, and he was thankful that the door was left ajar. He pulled that door open with his foot and carried his new wife into their bedroom, going straight for the bed and gently laying her on it. He quickly went to the bedroom door and closed it before turning back to Mikoto, who was now laying on the bed in a very sultry, sexy position. She was on her side, with one leg bent forward at the hip, laying in front of the other, hiding her most intimate place while one arm was propping her up by the elbow while the other was using her finger to gesture him towards the bed. With a sensual, love-filled smile, she said, "This is our wedding night, my husband. We're far from done." Naruto smiled excitedly, putting up a silencing seal before jumping into bed with Mikoto and spending the rest of the night enjoying the spectacular delights offered by the first woman who'd given herself to him heart, body and soul.